miscued it in so many ways. And, it's not just that there's only half as many going, but the excitement the day the Sevens tickets went on sale used to be palpable. Every office in Wellington had people sitting by the computer. There would be queues at post offices, people trying to get tickets in person. And, by 7 minutes past, I think, 10 a.m., everyone was texting their friends to say we managed to get tickets. And now they've cut them in half and they can't even sell half the tickets over 3 months.
Was there a watershed? Was there one year when Sevens fans ran riot through Capital? Shock?
No, it's always been like they talked about one year there was like 90 arrests, which out of 40,000. Though, you have to always look at not just the problems, but the greater good there. It's really sad because it's been such an iconic part of Wellington, because we took what was a rugby event and turned it into a great 2-day carnival and party. And, the majority of people who went there just had a great time and didn't cause any harm.
We've got funny conflicted ideas in New Zealand, and we've got that kind of bacchanalian drink till you drop culture, and then we've got this wowserism. It's been all through our history.
Yeah.
It's we can't embrace the bacchanalian. I'm sure there've been voices raised in Pamplona occasionally saying, this bull running thing has got to stop, because there's, obviously some collateral damage. But maybe we should just accept that sort of thing, and just embrace it as part of our culture.
We should all drink in moderation, Finlay.
Of course we should drink in moderation, but we should accept that because we're fun-loving party people and we've got this event called the Sevens, there's going to be some nonsense.
I know, you
but
did.
C'est la vie.
You did right about the dichotomy. Life jackets are also about if you hit your head on the board. You see, Marty Black says he's got buy-in, and I'm sure that's correct from all the southern panel boarders, but a few of the northern ones are pushing back against the idea of wearing a life jacket. I wonder how many paddle boarders hit their heads and go unconscious on the board.
Oh, I have no idea, but I did take his point about the freezing temperatures of those southern lakes. That had occurred to me.
And before we go, you've been scornful of this, I think, on Kiwi blog, David Farrar. New Zealand's highest earning speed cameras raking in an average of $1 million each year, but police say the fines still aren't high enough. This is Dave Cliff, I think, to deter speeding drivers.
Well, they're saying that the fines at the top end are high enough, but that they want to massively increase the fines for going 5 to 10 Ks over the limit. And, that to me just sounds wrong. That's not where the danger is. And actually, when you do look at our history, there has been a significant reduction in the medium speed. I think it's gone from the 85th percentile speed has gone from, I think, 112 Ks to 102 kilometres per hour.
You can see it on the roads, yeah.
Yeah, so, they're winning the speed one. You don't need to triple the fines for people going 6 Ks too fast.
The police, of course, we kind of got a set of alternative facts operating here, because the police are forever saying speed cameras are not revenue gathering, and they aren't for the police, but they are revenue gathering for the general coffers.
Of course they are.
A dark voice to end.
I have nothing more to say on the matter.
A very good alternative.
I feel bad if I see the light flash, it doesn't matter what the fine's going to be. I've been a naughty boy.
Finlay McDonald on the panel today. Thank you, Finlay.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Good on you for early fatherhood, David. It all gets better.
Thank you.
David Farrar with him. Thank you, everybody. And Checkpoint with John Campbell is coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, one of the 2 Pike River survivors tells us he is prepared to re-enter the mine. That interview coming up. Also tonight, 3 real estate companies pull their sponsorship of rodeos following our story last night, which showed footage of animals in distress. Gareth Morgan and Winston Peters trade insults at Rātana. Both men join us live. A Christchurch mental health facility nowhere near its best, and that is the government's own admission. But what's going to happen and when? Why unemployed teachers say there is no teacher shortage, and should a child start school when they turn 5 or at the start of a term? All of that and more coming up on a very busy Checkpoint. But first, Katrina with the news and, of course, the pips.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Daniel Rockhouse, one of only 2 people to survive the Pike River mine explosion, says he would be prepared to re-enter the mine with the right equipment and the right training. Solid Energy is now sealing the mine with the 29 bodies inside it. But several mines rescue personnel say they would be prepared to enter the mine to search what is known as the drift for bodies and any evidence of what caused the explosion. Speaking to Checkpoint, Daniel Rockhouse, who has applied to do mines rescue training in Australia, says he would go in with them and would indemnify the government against risk. He's urging Solid Energy not to seal the mine and says the decision not to let trained rescue personnel go in is completely wrong. 3 national real estate companies have cancelled their sponsorship of a Northland rodeo because of concerns around animal mistreatment. Checkpoint yesterday revealed footage of the Mid-Northern Rodeo that appeared to show calves being electric shocked, which is against government regulations as well as animals in states of distress. A Ministry for Primary Industries investigation into the allegations is still underway, but today real estate companies LJ Hooker, Harcourts and Ray White all cancelled their sponsorship of the rodeo. LJ Hooker and Harcourt say they'll be directing their franchises not to sponsor rodeo events. Party leaders have launched the verbal attacks against each other during their Rātana speeches, setting the tone for the election year ahead. The Opportunities Party leader, Gareth Morgan, has called the New Zealand First Leader, Winston Peters, a racist and an Uncle Tom, with Mr Peters hitting back and calling him a toothless sheep. Our political reporter May Heron is at Rātana.
During his speech, Gareth Morgan pleaded with the Rātana Church to rally against Winston Peters, who he called vicious, phobic and anti-treaty. But Mr Peters laughed it off, saying they should ignore a man who just needed some attention. The Labour Party also threw some punches, saying the Māori Party was shackled to a government that had done nothing for Māori. The celebrations here at Rātana are continuing, with the Prophet's birthday being celebrated tomorrow. Kei Rātana pā, ko May Heron tēnei.
The Prime Minister Bill English says while the government knew the new US president was planning to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's still a huge disappointment. Making good his election campaign promise, Donald Trump has signed an executive order formally withdrawing the US from the agreement. Bill English says he's asked the Trade Minister to prioritise discussions with other TPP partners about progressing the deal. He says Mr Trump also raised the prospect of negotiating bilateral trade deals, but he's not optimistic about New Zealand getting such a deal.
Look, if you ask me today, I'd think there's a pretty low chance of that happening in a form that we'd find satisfactory. But we wouldn't want to rule it out any more than we'd want to rule out other versions of progress on free trade with TPP or not.
Bill English. The Labour Party says the government should have considered house price inflation in its decision to lift the minimum wage. From April, the adult minimum wage will increase by 50 cents an hour to $15.75. The government says the 3.3% increase is much higher than annual inflation of 0.4%. But Labour's workplace relations spokesperson Ian Lees-Galloway says that's cold comfort to low-income earners who are struggling to pay their rent. A Wellington principal says she's worried about how well prepared pupils will be if they start school before they turn 5. Traditionally, children start school on their 5th birthday, but the government is looking at letting children start school from the beginning of the term closest to their 5th birthday. The principal of Te Aro School says starting new entrants in groups would make it easier to plan in terms of staffing. But Sue Clement worries about how some, particularly boys, will cope if they're starting before their 5th birthday.
Often the boys have played a lot outside and have enjoyed lots of being free-range chickens, doing their own little thing at preschool, and then they're expected to come inside and sit for extended periods and a much more formal, structured program. Yeah, we wondered about those boys' readiness for school.
Te Aro School Principal Sue Clement. It's 5:04. In sport, the American tennis player Venus Williams has reached her first Australian Open semi-final in 14 years after beating the Russian 24th seed Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova 6-4, 7-6 in Melbourne this afternoon. The 13th seed will play fellow American Coco Vandeweghe for a place in the final after the 25-year-old upset the 7th-seeded Spaniard Garbine Muguruza in straight sets a short time ago. The Black Caps coach Mike Hesson says Tom Latham would provide more flexibility for the team if he was to pick up the wicket-keeping duties in the upcoming one-day cricket series against Australia. Latham, who's considered a part-time keeper, has been included in the squad alongside the Wellington wicket-keeper Tom Blundell, with both players being considered as genuine options in that position. Hesson says using Latham behind the wickets would give the New Zealand team more options.
If we went with Tom Latham, we're able to have another power player in the middle order who also gives us an extra bowling option. You know, we've used Tom in the past spasmodically and he's done a very good job for us. We'll do it on a game-by-game basis and try and pick what we think's right for those conditions. But Tom, as I said, it just gives us slightly different options.
Mike Hesson says it's a decision they'll make the day before Monday's first game. And New Zealand could host some games in future years of the Australian Big Bash Cricket League. Cricket New South Wales is proposing that as a part of expansion to the T20 competition, games could be played in Asia and New Zealand. That's the news.
A housing headache.
The attempts to reform it have been disproportional to the size of the problem. It's been like setting a capuchin monkey on a gorilla.
A crippled deal.
It's fallen over because this model is no longer seen as a model that serves the interests of people.
A broken system.
Bill English stood on the Rātana marae yesterday and said that we've pretty much reached the situation where the government has done everything it can. That is totally wrong.
Putting the pieces together. Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how the case of the country's only convicted plane hijacker has exposed a gap between the mental health and justice systems. And after 10, former comic, actor, a mum of 3, and now kickboxing and boxing champ Gentian Lupi. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, cloudy periods and a few showers later tomorrow. Auckland to Waikato, also Bay of Plenty. Cloud gradually increasing and a period of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waitomo to Wellington and Gisborne to Wairarapa, including the central high country. Mainly fine, but cloud increasing this evening. A period of rain tomorrow morning and afternoon with heavy falls about the Tararua Range, then becoming fine in most places by evening. Northwesterlies rising to gale across Wellington and Wairarapa for a time tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough through to Otago, becoming cloudy with a few spots of rain tomorrow morning, then mainly fine. Northwest gales for a time today and early tomorrow. Bulletu for Fiordland, also Southland. Rain spreading north today, heavy at times, easing to showers tomorrow. Westerly gales, mainly in the south. And the Chatham Islands, fine, rain developing later tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Welcome, everyone. A reminder, we are broadcasting live on Facebook where you can watch us for the first time. In fact, it's the second night. Also, Freeview Channel 50 if you want to watch. YouTube, the RNZ website. We're streaming live on all of them. And, of course, you can listen, as so many of you still do, on the radio. A very full program this evening, however you're joining us. We reveal a Christchurch medical system, quote, under stress, meaning a mental health facility that even the government admits is not ideal. TPP and what future after Donald Trump ejects the US from it? Rātana, Gareth Morgan, Winston Peters and I quote, Uncle Tom. And the Oscars were so white last year. Will 2017 be different? April Rain joins us. But we begin with Pike River and one of only 2 men to survive the explosion in November 2010. Daniel Rockhouse spoke to us from Australia this afternoon. His mother, Sonia, is one of the protest leaders, of course, as the families of the 29 men killed try desperately to prevent the mine from being permanently sealed. And his brother, Ben, who was killed in the explosion, is somewhere inside that mine. Daniel Rockhouse struggled to cope at first with being a survivor. Despite his heroism in saving the other survivor, Russell Smith, he tried new lines of work, but felt even more adrift. So now he's back working in a mine in Australia. He told us he wants to become a qualified mines rescue worker and that when he is one, he would join the right team with the right gear and he would go back into Pike. As for the government and Solid Energy saying that's not going to happen,
mate, I think it's absolutely disgusting that it's getting sealed up. There's absolutely no reason you need to do that. And there's all these professionals and these people with experience, far more experience than anyone like myself or anything like that are saying that you can quite easily and safely recover that drift. And I just think it's wrong what they're doing.
You also said that with the right training and the right equipment, you would be prepared to be amongst that first party going in.
100%, no. Yeah. I'd be there with all the gear on and ready to go.
What will they find in there, do you think, Daniel?
I don't know. It's going in there and recovering some of the machinery that's in the drift, some of the electrical equipment that have brains and stuff like that you can do analysis on and potentially find evidence on what maybe happened, and also, if I'm here today talking to you and Russell's over home doing his thing, we survived. Yes, we were out further than the other boys, but what say that some guys survived as well and attempted to make their own way out and just didn't quite make it, and they're lying in the drift right now. Their bodies and stuff like that. It's people don't know. I'm not saying that there are bodies in the drift, but people don't know. You've got to go in, at least try and at least get that far, and and at least then, if you get in there and there's no one there, you can't find anything or anything like that, at least you tried, and at least you know that, hey, they're all up there together, and I can tell you right now that if we were able to reclaim that drift, and that's what happened, all the families will accept that, all right? And it's just not knowing if there's any boys attempted to make their way out, just like me and Russell, and just didn't quite make it. So, yeah.
Daniel, how far in were you?
Sorry?
How far in were you when the explosion happened?
Roughly about 1,800, 1,900 metres.
And the fall is how far? Much further in from you?
At a guess, John, bloody about another 800 metres, and that's a guess. I could be wrong.
Yeah. And how far is Spaghetti Junction from there?
From this side of the fall,
yeah.
Probably 300 metres, 300 metres.
Because
there were people. That fall was quite significant.
Yeah, it was significant. But there were people working at Spaghetti Junction. Conrad was there, for example, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah. Well, he just passed me. He was like in my statements that you would have read, and that he was the last guy that I spoke to. So he was passing me as I went through Spaghetti Junction. He asked me a few questions and that, and he went onward. But for all we know, he could be up further up. But the point is, there were other contractors working around Spaghetti Junction area. I don't know how many, but at least 3 or 4, and if people go, oh, they were crushed or something like that from the fall. The fall didn't happen till much later, and yeah, it's beyond me that the New Zealand government are willing to just make this disappear like it never happened, when there's so many men down there that are Kiwis and foreigners, but are just sitting there with it. It's like a unfinished business, like it's frustrating, very frustrating, and upsetting for us. So,
we try and talk to Solid Energy, and they never ever front for an interview, but the minister's fronted from time to time, and he says, and he says it very passionately, that they don't want to put any more lives at risk, and they believe it is a very, very dangerous environment. And that nothing would be gained if by going and more lives were lost.
How do they know? How do they know? Are they mining experts? Like I'm standing here today on the phone to you, and I'll sign whatever paperwork to get them out of the shit, so to speak, stating and willing to, as long as I've got the right training and the right gear to be able to go back into that mine, I will go back in there and I will risk my life to be able to do it. And there's many others. It's not just me. There's many others that are willing to do it as well. And they've got far more experience than me. And it's just not going to go away. And especially my mum and Anna and the rest of the people that are up there at that gate, day in and day out, like those people are unbelievable and just fantastic. They're not going to go away. And the government needs to realise this. So just deal with it. You grow a pair and deal with it, you know. I don't know how else to be any more blunt with you without swearing and stuff. So I'm sorry, but yeah, that's just who I am.
Daniel Rockhouse speaking to us earlier this afternoon. We will have more from that interview after the news at 6 o'clock. It's 5:15. Lots coming up. Just before we go on, last night on Checkpoint, we broke the story of what looks like the mistreatment of animals at a rodeo in Northland and what looks like the use of an electric prod on a calf in contravention, it would be, of animal welfare guidelines. As a result of our story, MPI is investigating. Also, as a result of our story, we can tell you now, 3 real estate companies have this afternoon pulled their sponsorship of the event. The footage given to Checkpoint was filmed at the Mid-Northern Rodeo event near Whangarei earlier this month. The New Zealand Rodeo Cowboy Association has denied any mistreatment of animals at the annual event, but the Whangarei franchises of Ray White, LJ Hooker and Harcourts have today withdrawn their sponsorship, and at a national level all 3 companies say they do not endorse rodeo and will direct their franchises not to support rodeos in future. A short time ago, very quickly, our reporter Zach Fleming, who broke the story last night, spoke to Harcourt's CEO Chris Kennedy, who said he took action the moment he was made aware of his company's association with the Mid-Northern Rodeo event.
I picked up the phone and I rang our northern business owner there in Whangarei, and I just had a quick chat to him, asked him about the sponsorship, asked him about the arrangement, and we had a conversation about it, and I'm pleased to say that he's agreed to remove the sponsorship, take the signage down. You have to understand that this is not something that I, as a CEO, condone, and this is not something that we as an organisation condone. We're a franchised operation, and we can't be across every level of sponsorship in every province and every town and every region that we cover across New Zealand. And as the largest franchise group in New Zealand, we cover 193 different locations. So we're not across every little bit of sponsorship.
What is it with rodeo that you have a problem with?
Look, you've only got to watch some of the video and some of the films that take place and some of the way the animals are treated. And there'll be people that say they're treated fairly. There'll be people that say they're not treated fairly. And I don't think that this is the forum that is right to debate that. I personally don't condone it. I don't enjoy seeing animals suffer. And I'll take fairly swift action with our franchise owners and ask them to remove that type of sponsorship.
One of 3 real estate companies to do something similar. That's Harcourt's CEO Chris Kennedy speaking with our reporter Zach Fleming. It's coming up to 18 minutes past 5. Mental health in Christchurch next, but first Rātana pā erupted in a war of words between political party leaders today, with Gareth Morgan calling Winston Peters an Uncle Tom and anti-treaty. The New Zealand First Leader hit back, labelling Mr Morgan, who heads the fledgling Opportunities Party, a toothless sheep and a thinned-down version of Kim.com. And the Labour Party continued to attack the government and the Māori Party for not doing enough for Māori. From Rātana, here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Brass band echoed throughout Rātana for the second day as political leaders were welcomed onto the pā. But with leaders from 4 different parties all speaking on the paipai, it didn't take long for the insults to start. The Opportunities Party leader Gareth Morgan pleaded with the Rātana Church to rally against Winston Peters, who he called vicious, phobic and racist.
Winston has no empathy with the situation Maori finds itself in, overrepresented in all the wrong economic and social indicators precisely because of the lack of recognition of its cultural values and taonga. I cannot understand why Maori don't stand up and call Winston out for being nothing more than an Uncle Tom and an envoy of the Kiwi not iwi fringe.
Winston Peters swiftly fought back.
Excuse me for laughing. But it's a long time since I've been ravaged by a toothless sheep.
And the New Zealand First Leader didn't stop there.
Mr Morgan, you need to know this, because when you talk about Uncle Tom, let me tell you, son, I've been here a long time. This is my 4th decade coming here. I began my legal career fighting in the biggest Maori land case this country had ever seen. And we won.
Labour's leader Andrew Little says attacking other parties is not part of the tikanga of Rātana, but he was happy to take his own swipe at the Prime Minister.
We have a government who came here yesterday and said that they have reached the limit of what they can do. And I come here today to say that's an abdication of leadership and an abdication of the responsibility of government. There is too much to do.
And before being welcomed onto the marae, Mr Little also had a go at the Māori Party, who arrived yesterday and sat alongside the Rātana elders today.
The Māori Party has been shackled totally to this national government that has failed Māori. The conditions for Māori have got worse in the last 9 years.
The Rātana Church has been closely aligned with the Labour Party for decades. However, the past few days, church elders have been meeting with other party leaders who are hoping they've said enough to sway some votes their way this election year. Kei Rātana pā mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko mei here in tēnei.
And after 6 tonight, Gareth Morgan and Winston Peters will both join us live. Coming up, the ramifications for New Zealand after US President Donald Trump withdraws from the TPP. What does that mean for the agreement? We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Don't forget, of course, we're on Facebook. A big wave to people who are watching us live streaming on Facebook. And we're also on Freeview Channel 50, YouTube and the RNZ webpage. We turn now to Christchurch and acute inpatient mental health care. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal that the system is so stretched that even the Associate Health Minister describes one facility as not ideal, saying, and I quote, "We would rather have the residents there in other better suited accommodation." The facility is the Seeger Clinic. It's part of the city's Princess Margaret Hospital, but in an email sent by the Associate Health Minister and Christchurch Central MP to a family member of an inpatient receiving care for paranoid schizophrenia, Nikki Wagner states the hospital would have been closed by now were it not for the earthquakes, that it's due to be decommissioned, and I quote, "The whole of Canterbury's medical system is under stress at the moment as we rebuild." Nikki Wagner declined to be interviewed about her comments, but her email was in reply to a complaint from Marcel Lunam, whose 51-year-old brother was in the Seeger Clinic.
And when we went to visit him, I was really shocked at the state of the building. Essentially, it was really dark, it was filthy, it was completely squalid. The building was like cracked, surfaces cracked, ceiling was crumbling. It looked like it had had some kind of quake damage. I'm not certain of that, but it looked like that. I mean, it was in an advanced state of disrepair. The kitchen was completely unhygienic and slovenly. It had a parquet floor that was ripped up in places, obviously completely worn, with the old floor showing underneath, and it, just a hotbed of, germs, you would imagine, festering away there. There was food slops on the floor that hadn't been cleaned of the dining room. As I said, it was predominantly dark, and I don't know whether or not they'd elected to keep the electricity off or whatever in parts of the building, but predominantly dark. And in these rooms that are locked, and, my brother's an acute paranoid schizophrenic, and he was in this one room, is completely desolate. This is a shocking place to put this very vulnerable person who's suffering acute psychosis and imagining these terrifying thoughts, people out to kill him or that he's evil. And he's in this situation of this room that has no window, no air conditioning, crumbling ceiling and, cracks in the walls. I mean, it would give anybody nightmares, let alone someone having a psychotic episode.
Marcel Lunam described the conditions to Nikki Wagner, who agreed it was not ideal and said they would rather have the residents elsewhere, but there was nowhere else to take him, and the family made the decision to pull the man out. They were given drugs by clinic staff and told to administer them at home. But while his 75-year-old mother slept, Marcel's brother had another psychotic episode and snuck out of the house.
And he couldn't be found, and so keep in mind he's diabetic, he's on 30 pills a day of these, incredibly strong meds. If he doesn't eat, he's sick. If he doesn't have his medication, he's sick. Plus, he's having a psychotic episode. So we had to do a missing persons report on him because he didn't come back all night. It was pouring with rain that night. He had been down in a park by himself under a tree, believing that he was, that somebody was after him, they were going to kill him.
Trapped between an inpatient facility the Associate Minister described as not ideal and attempting to care for Marcel's brother at home, the family have contacted Nikki Wagner, desperate to get an alternative to the Seeker Clinic and also to advocate for an alternative to the Seeker Clinic in Christchurch. Nikki Wagner replied, "The issue is how much work should you do on a building that is due to be decommissioned?" And she stated the whole of Canterbury's medical system is under stress. She apologised and, I quote, said, "Sorry, not a very satisfactory answer for the immediate term." Marcel Luhmann says that's simply not good enough.
And my question to the ministers that are stymieing a progress for a mental health facility that's so needed here would be, would you stay there overnight? Would you live in this place? Would you put your relative here? That would be my question to them, to the David Meatses and the Tony Gutschlags and to Nikki and to all these other people that are sitting there and they, on a taxpayer coin, and they should be accountable. They should be accountable for this, because mental health is an issue for so many of us. It's a really common problem, and I'm not saying acute psychotic disorder is, or paranoid schizophrenia is hugely common, but mental health is a big issue, particularly in Canterbury, when they knew in Canterbury that there was going to be an increased demand for mental health services due to the quake. They knew this, and there has been no concession made. And I'm furious about it. It's not good enough. It's not okay.
Marcel Luhmann. Nikki Wagner declined our invitation to be interviewed. Tony Gutschlag is the Canterbury DHB's General Manager for Mental Health Services. She would be interviewed. She says she doesn't know how long they'll keep using Seeker House or where mental health patients will go in the future.
We've got a range of health services and inpatient services on the Princess Margaret site, and it's fair to say that we're not happy with them. They're not ideal in terms of providing health services, but we're really trying to make the best of it at the moment, and the plan is to have a new facility, so we're just working through that process.
And when will you have the new facility?
I'm not sure. So we're working through the business case process. There's a...
sorry, forgive me, what's the business case process?
So there's a process that DHBs need to go through and work with the ministry on how we secure funding support for
Okay, so you're saying it's not ideal. That's precisely the same phrase the minister or associate minister's using, not ideal. And I guess it's not a coincidence that you're both using that phrase, but you still have to go through a business case pitch to the ministry to replace a building that by everyone's admission would have been gone by now were it not for the earthquakes, has been decommissioned, has no future and is not ideal.
That probably sums it up, John. Yeah, there's a range of services on that site and we don't have an immediate solution, and we really would like to be delivering or providing those services in a more contemporary environment. It would be better for patients, it would be better for their families, and it would be better for our staff.
This is a nightmare scenario for you, really, isn't it? Because I can tell by listening to your voice that actually you're not at all happy about the situation. And I can tell from reading the emails that everybody wishes the patients weren't being treated here.
That's correct, yep.
And so something has to happen, doesn't it? Because if we look for vulnerable people in our community, setting aside the very young and the very old, there aren't many more vulnerable people than people who are suffering from this degree of mental health illness.
I think there's all sorts of vulnerabilities, but in terms of people who need to use mental health services in Canterbury, we do. We've had particular challenges post-quake, and you'll be very aware of those, John, and many of your listeners will. But this is still uncharted water in a lot of ways. We've had
but boy, gosh, look, absolutely, and no one's blaming you for the earthquakes, and no one is blaming you for the fact that Princess Margaret is an elderly facility that was due to be decommissioned. Full stop. But I guess we're talking about uncharted waters that have been around. The earthquakes were 2011. There's been a lot of time to charter the waters, hasn't there?
Yeah, but partly we're needing to use those Princess Margaret facilities in different ways than we did back prior to the earthquakes, because we have run out of capacity in our acute inpatient unit on the Hillmorton site. So, there's kind of this cascade effect as you start to get more and more people needing to use the
Absolutely, and there have been previous discussions, about the impact of the earthquakes and the aftershocks and life in post-quake Christchurch on mental health. So what you are describing is a situation where there are insufficient beds, where you have an elderly and inadequate hospital trying desperately to do work that it is simply no longer fit for. Would you like now to pitch to the Minister and the Associate Minister, who is after all a Cantabrian, for more support, more beds, more money?
Of course, we would really like some support to get the business case process sorted. We need to have certainty, I think, in terms of time frame. So how long is it that we are going to be on the site for, so that we can make the best of the existing facility, we can make decisions about painting or decorating, and we can provide certainty to patients and their families.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I can't remember the last time I did an interview with someone who so manifestly sounded like they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. What's your title?
I'm the General Manager of Mental Health in Canterbury.
Right. And clearly, if you're the General Manager of Mental Health, you give a damn about mental health, right?
I absolutely do.
Okay. And on the other side, you seem to have an issue about securing the money, and you seem to still make a business case for something that actually is patently obvious, needs to be supported. And so this is a nightmare scenario, really, isn't it? Not only for you, but for everyone working with you and under you.
Yeah, that's right. And we've had really great support from the District Health Board. We have originally the plan was for the mental health services to be sitting in Christchurch Hospital. That was part of the original business case with that facility, but then that changed and we needed to go down a different pathway, so we're still working through that. So I understand that the business case from our DHB is going to the Ministry of Health Capital Investment Committee in February, so just a few weeks away, and we're really looking forward to hearing about the outcomes of that.
So the business case, so all going well, you're going to have an answer sometime after February?
I hope so, yeah.
And in the meantime, are your patients, are people like the man we have been talking about today, a paranoid schizophrenic who suffers from psychotic episodes, being cared for as well as you would hope?
Look, our staff do an amazing job in really difficult circumstances, and it's not always perfect, but I know people try really hard, and when we get feedback from families and patients that things aren't as they would like them to be, we really take notice of that and we make changes as we need to.
Tony Gooselak from the Canterbury DHB, who would front and did front, as you hear. The Christchurch Central MP and Associate Health Minister Nikki Wagner declined the invitation to be interviewed. 27 minutes to 6 exactly. Coming up, unemployed teachers dispute claims there's a teaching shortage in Auckland schools. Should a child start school on their 5th birthday or at the start of the next term? And newly released papers show the extent to which the Christchurch City Council was pressured into contributing $28 million towards the building of a car park. All of that and more coming up before 6. But first, Katrina with the headlines.
One of the 2 people who survived the Pike River mine explosion, in which 29 men died, says he would re-enter the mine. Solid Energy is sealing the mine with the men's bodies inside it, but several mines rescue personnel say they would be prepared to go in to search for bodies and the cause of the explosion. Speaking to Checkpoint, Daniel Rockhouse says with the right equipment and training, he would go in with them and would indemnify the government against risk. A war of words erupted between political party leaders today at Rātana, with Gareth Morgan calling Winston Peters an Uncle Tom and anti-treaty. The New Zealand First leader hit back, while the Labour Party continued its attack on the Māori Party for shackling itself to the government. 3 national real estate companies, LJ Hooker, Harcourts and Ray White, have withdrawn their sponsorship from a Northland Rodeo because of concerns about animal mistreatment. Yesterday, Checkpoint revealed footage of Mid-Northern Rodeo appearing to show calves at the rodeo being electric shocked. The Ministry for Primary Industries is investigating the allegations. Prime Minister Bill English says the government knew the new American president was planning to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it's still a huge disappointment. Donald Trump has signed an executive order formally withdrawing the United States from the agreement. Mr. English says he's asked the Trade Minister to prioritise discussions with the other TPP partners about progressing the deal. The police have suspended their air and water search today for a boatie missing off Otaki Beach. The man in his 30s disappeared yesterday afternoon when the small inflatable boat he was in capsized. The body of another man who was in his 50s was recovered yesterday afternoon. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Which is in 25 minutes, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, Katrina. New Zealand is preparing itself for a new era in trade, whatever that may be. The new American President, Donald Trump, scrapped the United States' involvement in the TPP today, dashing the government's hopes for better access to the world's biggest economies, despite the controversial quid pro quos, much discussed in New Zealand. Our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara, has been looking at this for us.
US President Donald Trump fulfilled his campaign pledge, signing an executive order in the Oval Office withdrawing the United States from the 12-nation TPP.
All right, we're going to sign 3 memorandums right now. The first one is withdrawal from the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
We've been talking about this for a long time. Thank you. Great thing for the American worker, what we just did.
It's a bitter blow to New Zealand's free trade supporters, who had pinned their hopes on the trade pact delivering a de facto backdoor trade deal with the US. A former trade negotiator, Charles Finney, says it'll hurt New Zealand's trade interests.
It leaves us with a problem. We don't have any free trade agreement with the United States. We don't have one with Canada, with Mexico, with Japan and Peru. TPP would have delivered that.
President Trump did offer a lifeline, saying the US would actively pursue bilateral deals. But the Special Agricultural Envoy, Mike Peterson, says this country is unlikely to be a high priority for America.
I certainly get the impression from President Trump that they are going to look to do deals with countries where the US can clearly be a beneficiary. And the problem for New Zealand is that with only 4.6 million people, we don't have a large consumer market.
The New Zealand government is reluctant to ditch the TPP, though, after spending more than a decade championing it. The Prime Minister, Bill English, is exploring the potential of a TPP without the US. Trade advocates agree a shrunken trade pact is less enticing, with one economist likening it to Hamlet without the prince, not worth doing. The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, says the government needs to face up to facts.
It's dead on the water now, and Mr English is trying to revive it by talking about Japan and elsewhere. He's absolutely, hopelessly out of his depth and desperate.
Despite the setback, the government is actively pursuing trade deals from Europe to the Middle East to Asia, including a review of New Zealand's free trade agreement with China. Nevertheless, Mr Trump has the potential to drop a spanner in the global trading system. The US president has threatened to slap heavy tariffs on Chinese goods, and some analysts fear that could trigger a trade war. Mike Peterson says the fallout could be hugely damaging to New Zealand.
They will certainly have an influence on the level of confidence in China to produce products that are destined for the US market. And that will then obviously reduce demand for the inputs that are coming from New Zealand.
Two-way trade between China and New Zealand is worth more than $20 billion, while the collateral damage on global trade, currencies and international relations would further magnify any economic shock. New Zealand has carefully managed its relationships with China and the US. The government won't want to be forced to choose sides in a world where globalisation means countries are more interconnected than ever before. For Checkpoint, Core Patrick O'Mara, Aho.
Thank you, Patrick. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Bill English, says while the government knew Donald Trump was planning to withdraw from the TPP, big part of his campaign, of course, it's still a huge disappointment. Bill English says he's asked his Trade Minister to prioritise discussions with other TPP countries about progressing another form of the deal, and he says he's optimistic about New Zealand's chances of securing a bilateral trade agreement.
Look, if you asked me today, I'd think there's a pretty low chance of that happening in a form that we'd find satisfactory, but we wouldn't want to rule it out any more than we'd want to rule out other versions of progress on free trade with TPP or not. Bear in mind, it's not the only game in town for us. We've got the European Union discussion going on. You've got this RCEP agreement in Southeast Asia, which has, up to now has been on a bit of a slow burn, but you might find the political will for that to pick up speed.
Billing the Prime Minister, it's 20 to 6, which is time for business. He's now a little later than usual, Nona Peltier, but better late than never. And Nona, on my notes, I have the phrase rock star economy, referring to New Zealand.
That's right.
The dude who coined this is saying what?
He's saying it's all back on, rock and roll. That's
who is
right.
he? Who remind us who he is?
Well, he's with the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, and he's based in Australia, and his name is Paul Bloxham. And we've had a chance to talk to him a few times. He's very gung-ho on the New Zealand economy. He's expecting it to do very well. So I guess he didn't hear the piece about Donald Trump giving us a hard time.
So he's based in Australia and he works for the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank.
Yes.
He coined the phrase rockstar economy for New Zealand.
Yes, he did.
Which of course John Key loves so much. I'm surprised he didn't have T-shirts printed.
Well, didn't he?
Oh, he may have.
There's an opportunity missed.
And so he's saying it again. Why?
Well, basically, we've seen a lot of indicators, and we've talked about this over the last few months and then just even this week already. Basically, the New Zealand economy is expected to grow about 3% annually, which is, ahead of most other developed economies. And it's pretty consistent growth. And it's driven by the kinds of things that are not necessarily dependent on international trade as such. We've got construction, we've got tourism, and we've got population growth. And those things underpin the New Zealand economic story, and those things are set to continue, and we've seen that time and again, all sorts of different kinds of indicators coming through.
There's another indicator that's just come through,
that's right. We got another one today. So last week we had the Performance of Manufacturing Index. That's a survey of manufacturers, very positive. Today we had the Performance of Services, and that's the sector that delivers things like retail services and those kinds of things. And it's really buoyant. It's at 58.4, so anything over 50 indicates expansion. 58.4, that's very strong. And in parts of those sectors, the growth, the expansion is above 60, which is, again, and the kinds of things that are above 60 are production, sales, orders, new orders, business. So these are very positive indicators all up.
Right, and with these positive indicators coming through, what happened on the markets today? Was there interest in the Kiwi dollar?
There was. Now, interestingly, the New Zealand dollar moved up a little bit. When you look at the US dollar, it's a real drag. Some of the share markets are really in the doldrums because there's concern about the impact of trade. No one really likes these protectionist talks from Mr. Trump. However, our index fell just a tad, only down 4 points. That's our NZX Top 50 index to 7,066, so it's just pretty good. The New Zealand dollar, again, little changed, a little bit stronger, 72.4 US cents, which is better than it was yesterday, and 95.5 Australian.
Still strong against the Aussie, eh?
Yes, gaining all the time.
Yeah, Nona Peltier, thanks, Nona. Would you rather your child started school on their 5th birthday or at the start of a new term? That's the question politicians are mulling over as thousands of children prepare for the start of the school year. Traditionally, children start school on their 5th birthday, as we all know, but the government is looking at letting children start school from the beginning of the term closest to their birthday. Catherine Hutton spoke to principals, teachers and parents to gauge their reaction to this proposal.
Auckland mother Kate Abella's daughter starts school next week. Although she turned 5 last month, the school policy didn't allow new entrants to start after November. Miss Abella, who is a primary school teacher herself, says she's happy her daughter will start as part of a group, rather than start school for 2 weeks at the end of last year.
I was happy for her to start afresh, start how school's going to be from now on. First day, everyone's starting on the first day. Even kids that are coming back in her class that have been in year 0, they're still first day of the school year, new teacher, so they're all kind of in the same boat.
Those who work in schools are more ambivalent, but worry about the readiness of children and the workload on teachers if cohort entry becomes the norm. Sue Clement is based at Wellington's Te Aro School. As a principal, she says it would be nice to know exactly how many 5-year-olds will be walking through the gates at the start of each term, to plan in terms of staffing. But she worries about how some, particularly boys, will cope if they are starting before their 5th birthday.
Often the boys have played a lot outside and have enjoyed lots of being free-range chickens, doing their own little thing at preschool, and then they're expected to come inside and sit for extended periods and a much more formal, structured program. And so we're looking, we wondered about those boys' readiness for school.
Then there's the additional workload for teachers, especially given the assessments required when children start school. Liz Brown is a new entrant teacher.
As a new entrant teacher, you always do a new entrant assessment, and then they're usually followed by interviews with the parents after about 6 weeks or so. So for teachers, that would mean that you'd have all these expected at once, where the present way of doing things, they're staggered, which makes it a lot easier.
Liz Brown says the current system allows those who have settled in to help others when they join the class and treats children as individuals. But she says there are advantages to starting children in groups.
When children begin school, you naturally sort of tell them the expectations and introduce them to the learning program and routines and where things are, etc. So you would be doing that once instead of many times.
The head of the Principals Federation, Whetū Cormac, says schools can already opt for cohort entry and there's no need to change.
Why change a system that's not broken? New entrant teachers are incredibly skilled at transitioning young ones to school after they've left their early childhood or kindergartens. Children arrive at school up and ready to go. They're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready for their new school. And so teachers in the present environment are able to cope with those transitions very well.
Whetū Cormac says he will be making a submission to the Education Amendment Bill in the coming weeks. For Checkpoint, ko Catherine Hutton Tēnei.
Newly released papers appear to show the extent to which the Christchurch City Council was pressured into contributing $28 million towards the building of a car park attached to the Crossing retail development. In 2014, the Carter Group gave the council just 4 days to agree to a deal and threatened to pull the $140 million Central City development completely if it didn't sign up. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Conan Young.
The ultimatum followed 12 months of negotiations between the Carter Group, headed up by the city's wealthiest man, Philip Carter, and the Christchurch City Council. It was delivered in a letter which gave the council just 4 days to comply or place in jeopardy the future of the crossing and the entire retail precinct, the flagship development the city was pinning its hopes on to help kick-start the rebuild of its shattered CBD.
I cannot stress enough the importance of a decision on the Crossing car park to enable the survival of the retail precinct. As you are well aware, if we do not reach resolution this week, Carter Group, and I'm sure others, will be withdrawing any proposed developments for the retail precinct.
A revised deal that slightly trimmed the council contribution and removed the requirement for it to operate the car park was put to the full council 3 days later, a day before the deadline expired. Although staff were recommending the deal to councillors, a staff report made it clear there were major reservations about it.
Because of the very short deadline, staff have not been able to conduct the normal level of analysis, but in the time available have identified that while it's an improvement, financially it's still not an attractive option for the council, although Carter Group maintain that it's fair and reasonable.
As well as requiring the cash-strapped council to borrow extra money to meet the cost of its contribution to the car park, staff made it clear to councillors the car park would lead to traffic congestion on an already busy street. This was partly due to plans by the council to rebuild another car park just a few hundred metres away. Despite all of this, Councillor Raf Manji, who was instrumental in securing the deal with the Carter Group, says it was the right thing to do at the time.
The council was in a completely different position. You know, we still didn't really have a good handle on our finances. We knew there was a big blowout in the budget. Yeah, it was a very different time, and I think we had to take a much broader view around the risks to the Central City recovery. And probably if we were making this decision now, we'd probably go a different way and we'd probably build it ourselves.
Raf Manji says without the deal, the investment that is now happening in Christchurch's CBD would have dried up completely.
So, you know, there was kind of like this domino effect. And I think the problem we had is the delay in council making a decision on this really was starting to, you know, eat away at confidence in people investing. And once this was approved, everything else fell into place.
Raf Manji says the proof is in the pudding, and the Crossing car park, which opened just before Christmas, is already attracting shoppers to the fledgling retail precinct. RNZ News approached Philip Carter for comment, but he's overseas and unavailable. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Let's return to our schools now. With the time at 10:30 to 6, unemployed teachers are disputing claims there's a teacher shortage in Auckland. Principals in the city have been saying the situation is at crisis point, but teachers have told Checkpoint there are plenty of qualified people looking for full-time work and schools are just being too fussy. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
This teacher trained in South Africa and says she's been stuck with relieving work for the past 8 years because schools are being far too picky about who they hire.
They are being too choosy. I feel that, you have your teachers right there on your doorstep. They are looking for work. Why must you go and get teachers from overseas when you have people readily available? I applied at one school and the principal emailed me and she said, this job is not for you. It's been very hard.
The teacher, who asked not to be named because she doesn't want to harm her chances of finding a job, says there are many other New Zealand-trained teachers in the same situation and they're demoralised they can't find work. Another teacher who emailed RNZ News says she hopes Auckland's dire teacher shortage meets up with her dire shortage of job offers.
Otherwise, despite the claims that New Zealand is facing the worst teacher shortage that it has ever seen and is needing to recruit New Zealanders back from overseas as a result, I will have to look internationally for a teaching position, or perhaps resign myself to flipping hamburgers at McDonald's.
One of the principals who's been holding out for just the right candidate is Neil Watson at Otahuhu College. He's had a vacancy for a maths teacher since the middle of last year and says his determination to wait for the very best candidate is not unreasonable.
We have a responsibility to our families to make sure we get the very best teachers. We all know from our own experiences at school, you get a good teacher in front of you and you're successful. If you have a teacher who's weaker, then you go backwards in your learning. And our job as a school is to make sure that we do the very best for our students and for their families.
The spokesperson for the Auckland Primary Principals Association, Francis Nelson, says schools have to protect the best interest of their students.
They only get each year once. If you make a bad decision, then those children suffer. So I would absolutely defend the right of principals to be as picky as they possibly can.
Oasis Education helps schools hire teachers and find relievers. Its manager, Martin Strang, agrees that schools are not being excessively fussy about who they hire.
A lot of schools have hired a significant number of beginner teachers and they can't really take too many on because obviously that puts a stress on the experienced teachers and on middle management, senior management and the infrastructure and support that the schools offer. So I don't think they're being too picky.
Martin Strang says there's a significant shortage of primary teachers, especially in low decile schools. He says the situation for secondary schools is not quite so bad, but there is a shortage in science and maths and some humanities subjects. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
A dispute is brewing over the prospect of the historic Gables building in New Plymouth being re-roofed with corrugated iron. Built in 1848, the former colonial hospital has a Historic Places Category 1 listing and is roofed in traditional wooden shingles. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
A New Zealand governor of the 1840s, Sir George Grey, had the Gables built to provide care for Māori and Pākehā patients as part of his policy of assimilating Māori into European culture. It's the only one of 4 such hospitals built in the North Island, still standing today. Designed by the architect Frederick Thatcher, it is made of heart rimu and brick and has steeply pitched roofs and decorative cross bracing typical of the Anglo-Gothic style. A New Plymouth historian, Ron Lambert, says re-roofing the building in corrugated iron is a cost-cutting measure and unthinkable.
To be quite honest, when I heard about it, I was absolutely appalled. It's one of the top New Zealand early colonial buildings. It's not quite as well known as the Stone Store or Kemp House, but it's in that league, and it needs the dignity that it deserves, and it's not corrugated iron.
Mr. Lambert says corrugated iron would ruin the building's entire aesthetic.
I think it'll destroy it visually, completely and utterly. It's meant for shingles. Shingles are what it was originally built for, and it's never had anything but shingles on it in its 170 years.
After a period of neglect, the building was bought in 1904 for £10 by Mary King, the wife of a businessman, Newton King. They named it the Gables and moved it from Te Henui to Brooklands, where it is today. It was gifted to New Plymouth on Mary King's death in 1934. The King's granddaughter, Adrian Tatham, says she has an emotional attachment to the building and believes they would be horrified at the prospect of a corrugated iron roof.
I have a long-standing gardening commitment in here, and I'd hate to see the building roofed in corrugated iron because it's quite out of character.
The manager of infrastructure projects at the New Plymouth District Council, Andrew Barron, says the Gables roof is leaking and needs replacing. He says the council has been given the green light to consider using corrugated iron, which would cost about a third less than cedar shingles.
We've been in discussions with Heritage New Zealand, and they have it doesn't have to be replaced like for like. So as I say, we're still looking at we're just looking at options, of which replacing like for like is one of the options.
Heritage New Zealand says the country has a long history of overlaying shingles with corrugated iron. Its architectural advisor for the Central Region, Alison Darfield, says it was one of the options discussed with the council.
In the early stages of our discussion, we consider all options, and one of the matters that seemed to be important to the council was the associated costs. And we are mindful of the costs on the council.
However, Ms Dangerfield says Heritage New Zealand will now be recommending the roof be replaced with shingles. In New Plymouth, for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tēnei.
In the next few hours, the Oscar nominations come out. Over the past 2 years, as they've come out, the nominees in the main categories have been so overwhelmingly white. April Rain, a writer, editor and former lawyer, was furious. Oscars so white, she tweeted, creating a hashtag that became a movement. Now, with films like Hidden Figures and Moonlight on the big screen, will the Oscars be less white? Well, April Rain says yes and no.
It is with respect to films that reflect the Black experience. But let's remember that Oscars So White is not just about race. It is not just about gender. It's also about sexual orientation and the differently abled and the First Nation status. So while we do have a fantastic slate of films that reflect the Black experience this year, we have taken a step backward with respect to other marginalized communities. So Oscars So White, unfortunately, is still very much alive, and we still have more work to do.
April, I want to put in a bit of a plug for Moonlight, which is on in New Zealand at the moment. It just opened last week, and that is a film in which the entire cast is African Americans. There's not a single white person in the movie, and also at the centre of the movie is the narrative around the main star and his gayness, and it is a beautiful movie, isn't it?
It's a fantastic film, and I was really, really happy with all facets of it. I think Barry Jenkins, as the director, did a phenomenal job. Remember, this was an independent film, so it was made for a much smaller budget than many of the other films that you probably have seen this year. It also cast some actors who were relatively unknown. And then also the star that many know, the male star, Mahershala Ali, who I think did a tremendous role in the film. And also Janelle Monáe, who is definitely doing a fantastic job moving between singing and acting. So I was very pleased with the film.
It's an extraordinary time in American history, isn't it? And it strikes me that we are seeing, forgive me for using such a lazy old phrase, but an example of the squeaky wheel getting the oil. In other words, you know, Trump's constituency have got their president, and this has been about you speaking out and reminding Hollywood of their responsibilities to reflect all the community they exist within, not just part of it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And what we see is that this benefits Hollywood as well. So if you want to talk about another movie that reflects the Black experience, Hidden Figures was #1 in the box office for 2 weeks in a row, which is unheard of for a film of this caliber that stars 3 Black women. We've just never had that before. So diverse stories sell tickets, and that really is the bottom line for Hollywood or for any corporation, really, right? What is going to be the bottom line financially? And so I hope that the success of Hidden Figures and Moonlight and some other movies will spur Hollywood to continue to make these changes, not only with respect to films that reflect the Black experience, but we still have a long way to go. So where is the romantic comedy that stars two people from the LGBTQIA community? You know, we have, for example, the fantastic Sir Patrick Stewart, who plays a disabled superhero in the X-Men franchise. But where is the disabled actor or actress who actually plays a superhero on their own? So again, more work that needs to be done.
April Rain, the woman behind Oscars So White, who's been a regular guest on Checkpoint over the past year or so. Wonderful company. That film Moonlight, extraordinary. Coming up at 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. One of the two Pike River survivors has put his hand up to enter the mine. Daniel Rockhouse received a bravery medal for his efforts in dragging himself and fellow miner Russell Smith to safety following the 2010 disaster. He says he passed other miners in an area of the mine known as Spaghetti Junction just moments before the first explosion, and their bodies could still be in the drift. Mr Rockhouse, who's now working on a Queensland mine, told Checkpoint he would sign a waiver removing responsibility from the government if he was to enter Pike River.
As long as I've got the right training and the right gear to be able to go back into that mine, I will go back in there and I will risk my life to be able to do it. And there's many others. It's not just me. There's many others that are willing to do it as well. And they've got far more experience.
Daniel Rockhouse, whose brother Benjamin did not survive Pike River. 3 national real estate companies have cancelled their sponsorship of a Northland rodeo due to animal mistreatment concerns. Footage of the rodeo near Whangarei, released yesterday, appears to show calves being electric shocked, which goes against government regulations. A Ministry for Primary Industries investigation into the allegation is still underway, but today real estate companies LJ Hooker, Harcourts and Ray White all cancelled their sponsorship of the rodeo. Harcourt's Chief Executive Chris Kennedy told Checkpoint he took action as soon as he was made aware of his company's association with the rodeo.
Look, there'll be people that say they're treated fairly, there'll be people that say they're not treated fairly. I personally don't condone it, I don't enjoy seeing animals suffer. As I say, I'll take fairly swift action with our franchise owners and ask them to remove that type of sponsorship.
Harcourt's head Chris Kennedy. The Prime Minister says the government has struck the right balance in lifting the adult minimum wage by a further 50 cents. From April, the minimum wage will increase to $15.75 an hour. Opposition parties say it should have been a bigger increase to match rising house costs. But Bill English says since 2008, the minimum wage has been lifted by 31%, which he says is much higher than the rate of inflation at 14%. He says that means that real incomes for those on the minimum wage have increased by 17%. A woman whose brother is being cared for in a mental health clinic in Christchurch says conditions there are appalling. The Seeger Clinic is an inpatient facility at the city's Princess Margaret Hospital. An email from the Associate Health Minister and Christchurch Central MP, Nikki Wagner, says the whole of Canterbury's medical system is under stress while the city is rebuilt after the earthquake. That email was sent to Marcel Lunam, who says her 51-year-old brother is living in terrible conditions.
My brother is an acute paranoid schizophrenic, and he's in this room that has no window, no air conditioning, crumbling ceiling and cracks in the walls. I mean, it would give anybody nightmares, let alone someone having a psychotic episode.
Marcel Lunam, speaking on Checkpoint, says conditions in the kitchen are unhygienic and the whole building is dark and filthy with cracks. New Zealand is bracing itself for a new era in trade. The new American President, Donald Trump, scrapped the United States' involvement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership today, dashing the government's hopes for better access to the world's biggest economy. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
While expected, Mr Trump's formal withdrawal from the TPP is a bitter blow to the government and New Zealand's free trade supporters, who had pinned their hopes on the TPP delivering a de facto backdoor trade deal with the US. President Trump did offer a lifeline, saying the US will actively pursue bilateral deals. But the Special Agricultural Envoy Mike Peterson says this country is unlikely to be a high priority for America. Mr Peterson warns of further setbacks if Mr Trump also carries out his threat to impose tariffs on China, saying that could harm New Zealand's exports to Asia. This is Patrick O'Mara.
The mother of a new entrant pupil says sending 5-year-olds to school at the start of term instead of on their birthday would be less disruptive for children and their teachers. The Ministry of Education is proposing a cohort entry policy under which children start school in a group on the first day of term closest to their 5th birthday. Kate Abella, a primary school teacher herself, says the proposal has advantages for everyone.
I just think it's a bit of a cleaner start, and they get to start with other kids that are coming in, because I guess from a teacher's perspective, when you've got a new entrant class, you're being drip-fed kids throughout the term, and so you're constantly having to go over the settling in period.
Kate Abella's daughter Lily starts school next week. The Qualifications Authority has deregistered an Auckland tertiary institution with 200 foreign students. It says the Aotearoa Tertiary Institute, which provided business and management diplomas, fell short of rules in several areas. The authority says it's working with another tertiary organisation to provide education to ATI students. It's 6:05. In sport, the American tennis player Coco Vandeweghe has continued her winning rampage at the Australian Open, upsetting yet another seed to make her first ever Grand Slam semi-final. Vandeweghe, who knocked out the world number 1 Angelique Kerber in the 4th round, beat the Spanish 7th seed Garbina Muguruza 6-4, 6-0 to set up an All-American semi-final with Venus Williams. In the men's competition, Germany's Misha Zverev, who upset the men's top seed Andy Murray, will soon play his tennis idol. Zverev will meet 17th seed Roger Federer in the quarterfinals tonight and says he's facing the Swiss player on such a big stage is a dream come true.
Growing up, he was my idol, and I still believe that he's the greatest player of all time. And if there's tennis on TV, then if it's Roger, I'd always stop and watch it, because I think he's just phenomenal. He's just everything he does on court is really incredible. So playing him in the quarters of the Australian Open would give me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Misha Zverev and Roger Federer's match is scheduled to begin at 9 o'clock tonight. Meanwhile, the former world number 1 tennis players Kim Clijsters of Belgium and American Andy Roddick have been inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. The late French Formula 1 driver Jules Bianchi now has a street named after him following a ceremony in his home city of Nice. Bianchi, who was 25, died in hospital after 9 months in a coma following a Japanese Grand Prix crash in October 2014 that left him with severe head injuries. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the odyssey of Heather Hapeta in Sarasota, home to most of Florida's Amish people. How do they cope without air conditioning? Trevor Reiki brings us some of the latest music from the Global Village after the news at 11, and our philosopher Anne Kerwin wants to talk about love, but not the choking kind. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, cloudy periods and a few showers later tomorrow. Auckland to Waikato, also Bay of Plenty, cloud gradually increasing and a period of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waitomo to Wellington and Gisborne to Wairarapa, including the central high country, mainly fine but cloud increasing this evening. A period of rain tomorrow morning and afternoon with heavy falls about the Tararua range, then becoming fine in most places by evening. Northwesterlies rising to gale across Wellington and Wairarapa for a time tomorrow morning. Nelson and Marlborough to Otago, becoming cloudy with a few spots of rain tomorrow morning, then mainly fine. Northwest gales for a time today and early tomorrow. Bulla to Fiordland, also Southland, rain spreading north today, heavy at times, easing to showers tomorrow. Westerly gales mainly in the south. And the Chatham Islands fine, rain developing later tomorrow. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. One of 2 Pike River survivors is demanding a rescue team be granted permission to enter the mine, saying he needs to know if any of his co-workers survived the first blast, even if only for a short time. what happened in there and why. Daniel Rockhouse received a bravery medal for his heroic act dragging fellow semi-conscious miner Russell Smith to safety following the disaster in November 2010. He says he passed at least 4 other miners in the minutes before the first explosion, and he believes they may not have been far behind him in the drift, potentially, if they survived that first explosion. Mr. Rockhouse, now working in a Queensland mine, says he needs to enter the mine for closure.
The point is there were other contractors working around Spaghetti Junction area. I don't know how many, but at least 3 or 4, you know. And if people go, oh, they were crushed or something like that from the fall. The fall didn't happen till much later. So
there is a possibility, and no one knows this, and this is the whole point.
Yeah.
That obviously they, after the first explosion, they did exactly what you did if they survived it. And forgive me for such a brutal conversation, and that is they started to make their way out, right? That's inevitable if you survive. Right. And you made your way out, and you saved Russell's life by finding him and helping him get out. Presumably they tried to do the same thing, and they weren't that far away from you. They were a few hundred metres to a K away from you?
Yeah, it wouldn't have even been a kilometre. No way. It's such a small distance that if they survived the initial blast, which I believe that at least some of them did, there's such a high potential for them to be making their way out, and something's gone wrong, or they've passed out, or their rescuer, they didn't put the rescuer on properly, just like I did. I will fully admit that when I put my rescuer on, I didn't put it on properly, and it didn't work to the best of its ability because I was panicking so much. But maybe they did the same, and their environment, their circumstances were different to mine. I was just bloody lucky, and yeah, it's beyond me that the New Zealand government are willing to just make this disappear like it never happened, when there's so many men down there that are Kiwis and foreigners, but are just sitting there with it. It's like a unfinished business, like it's frustrating, very frustrating, and upsetting for us. So.
We try and talk to Solid Energy, and they never ever front for an interview, but the minister's fronted from time to time, and he says, and he says it very passionately, that they don't want to put any more lives at risk, and they believe it is a very, very dangerous environment, and that nothing would be gained if by going and more lives were lost.
How do they know? How do they know? Are they mining experts? Like. I'm standing here today on the phone to you, and I'll sign whatever paperwork to get them out of the shit, so to speak, stating and willing to, as long as I've got the right training and the right gear to be able to go back into that mine, I will go back in there and I will risk my life to be able to do it. And there's many others. It's not just me. There's many others that are willing to do it as well, and they've got far more experience than me.
Yeah, we've spoken to them, including senior mines rescue figures in New Zealand. We've spoken to them. They've been on this program.
That's right. There's guys over here. There's guys over here that are in mines rescue that have said the exact same thing. We would go in. We would go in. We've got the gear. We've got the expertise. We've got the resources. Why? We'll come with you. We'll go in. It's unreal. The only thing stopping them is all this red tape from the frigging government, and it doesn't make sense. There is no reason that we can't at least try. Okay, so it's just it's an absolute piss take, to be frank with you, mate. So yeah.
Daniel Rockhouse talking to us from Australia earlier this afternoon. It's 6:13. A top trade negotiator says the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not dead, despite the United States pulling out of the deal. The US President Donald Trump signed an executive order today withdrawing from the trade pact, which was signed by 12 nations, including New Zealand, and covered 40% of the world's economy.
All right, we're going to sign 3 memorandums right now. The first one is withdrawal from the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Everyone knows what that means, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. Thank you. Okay. Great thing for the American worker, what we just did.
Donald Trump signing it with Mike Pence looking on. New Zealand Special Agricultural Trade Envoy Mike Peterson told our reporter Sharon Brett-Kelly the decision is a lost opportunity worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but it does not mean the end of trade with the US.
We've lost an opportunity here. We haven't lost a market. We have seen growing trade into the USA in particular from New Zealand, and I expect that's going to continue to grow. But the opportunity for us here really is a lost opportunity to really integrate these economies further.
But where to now for TPP? I mean, can you have TPP without the US?
Well, you certainly can have TPP without the US, but that is going to depend very much upon the appetite from Japan to actually continue to make the commitments to the other 10 member countries. I think that there's certainly an opportunity for something to evolve out of TPP, and that may be without the US for now, but also with some provision for the US to join at a later stage. Because the business interests in the US are absolutely hot on the need for greater integration with the Asia Pacific, and I have no doubt they'll be pushing the administration to try and secure some of those gains.
What about New Zealand's trade with the US now? What do you see changing, given that Donald Trump is very into protecting US companies, protecting jobs there?
I think the difficulty for New Zealand is that we're a small consumer market, so with only 4.6 million people, we're less attractive to the US than other countries. So you'll see today President Trump has come out and said that he would like to pursue bilateral agreements with the TPP member countries where they don't already have an agreement in place, and so that's a very good opportunity for New Zealand and a good signal for New Zealand.
But you don't see New Zealand as a priority for the US?
I don't see that we'll be one of the first in the queue. I think that the signals already are that Prime Minister May from the UK is going to be there next week, and those bigger economies I think will get a first chance. But I have been heartened by the fact that New Zealand is not the country or one of the countries that President Trump has signalled out as being one of those countries that he has issues with. So, we actually do play by the rules. We don't have any of the issues that other countries have in doing business with America, particularly around things like automobiles, which is particularly sensitive.
And how long is all this likely to take?
I think we have to be realistic and accept that the 11 member countries in TPP have got a lot of talking to do, and that's going to take at least 6 months just to get those talks, I think, resolved. And we still have a period of time where ratification of TPP is still possible by the remaining countries. So that's still a year away before that period expires. So then we need to look at talks between the US and maybe ourselves as a bilateral partner, and again, I don't think we'll be at the front of the queue for that, but those sort of talks, I think, will still take a period of time, probably a year or two.
That's New Zealand's Special Agricultural Trade Envoy, Mike Peterson, speaking with Sharon Brett-Kelly. It's 70 minutes past 6. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ. Two political party leaders turned on each other today at Rātana Pa, with Gareth Morgan describing Winston Peters as an Uncle Tom, while the New Zealand First Leader called him a toothless sheep. The two leaders were attending their annual Rātana commemorations, along with other opposition parties. Of course, Bill English was there yesterday. Mr Morgan, the leader of the fledgling Opportunities Party, was welcomed onto the marae along with MPs from Labour, the Greens and New Zealand First. He didn't pull his punches when his turn came to speak, describing Mr Peters as an Uncle Tom and his party as anti-treaty. Gareth Morgan will join us in a moment, but first Winston Peters is on the line, I think, travelling back from Rātana. Are you there, Mr Peters?
I am.
Happy New Year. Nice to talk to you.
And you too. Now, can I just correct one thing? I did not turn on him. He launched into a totally unprovoked attack on me. He needed a headline. Otherwise, his turgid speech, which was putting Mogadon out of business and turning the audience to sleep, would amount to nothing. And I predicted to the media that he did it all on purpose to try and get himself a headline, and that's why I'm talking to you.
Okay, so we'll discuss that with him, and I'll raise exactly that point with him. How did you feel about being described as Uncle Tom?
Well, frankly, I couldn't give a rat's derriere about that. When a man comes off a motorbike, travelling half around the darn Asian world and pleasing himself and thinking that he'll step up and now be a political party leader, should show a bit more understanding of the issue itself. He showed, and the audience will tell you that, I've never seen such an appalling performance at Rātana, and it turned into a comedy.
How do you see the treaty? How does New Zealand First view the treaty in the life of New Zealand? Gareth Morgan describes you and your party as anti-treaty.
Well, what would he know about the treaty? I mean, who is this sort of advocate for the treaty of whom I've been unaware for all these years? And all of a sudden, about 2 or 3 years ago, he decided it's the biggest issue since sliced bread, and that the Maori need an upper house. And as I pointed out to the audience at Rātana, 75% of Maori can't get any sort of house at the moment in terms of private ownership, and they're renting at the very worst of the heap. And frankly, we do not need, nor does the Rātana need, a lecture from him.
Okay. Can you answer the question? Are you and New Zealand First anti-treaty? Let's ignore Gareth Morgan. Are you and New Zealand First? Let's
ignore him. That'd be a very smart move. Now, look, the treaty is a founding document of this country. It is significant in that context. But a 3-clause treaty, which is now being translated by all and sundry, including Gareth Morgan, into a set of principles, if you could possibly tell me what those principles are and have them agreed by...
Hold on a second. What do you believe they are?
Well, the Treaty of Waitangi contains 3 clauses. They do not contain fundamental principles of the type of which he describes and capable of being enacted into law. Now, the most famous Maori politician, a scholar in law itself, Sir Ngata, pointed out that it would be a bad idea to ratify the treaty. Now, I regard him as an authority. I do not regard a Johnny-come-lately of the type that I'm seeing here as having any breadth or grasp of the issue at hand.
Okay.
What Maoridom want is not an elite asking for things in their name. They want the fundamental delivery of human, economic and social advancement. That's what we're focused on.
Okay, and do Māori need to be particularly targeted, given the figures that you and I both know: a shorter life expectancy, disproportionate likelihood to end up in jail, have poor education outcomes, commit suicide, terrible things. Do Māori need to be targeted, and if so, what is New Zealand First doing to address the specific issues of Māori in this country?
Right. When we saw the face of the Green Paper back in 1988, I opposed it as a National Party spokesman back then, and I've opposed it ever since. Now, let me tell you, I was asked back then by the Rātana leadership, Mrs. Hura in particular, to come and give a commitment to them to ensure that there were pan-Maori organisations such as the Maori Women's Welfare League, the Maori Wardens, Kongarua, and others getting a fair go. That's what we're targeting. We're not targeting this group which says, look, in your name, we want water rights and control over this country. And when you say, well, when is that going to get to the ordinary Maori person, and when did an ordinary Maori person make that demand, they can't answer you. And I can go to Morawa, and I can go to Kaitaia, I can go down to places like Aporiki and the East Coast and say, now, do you guys get any fish allocation for you personally, family by family? And the answer is always no.
Okay, let's use the example of Moerewa, and that is a community we all know is doing it hard in Northland, right?
It's doing it real hard, and I'll tell you the reason why, because there's been economic neglect in a grand scale there.
Okay, absolutely. So what would you do to target communities like that? And I think this is a really important... I mean, this is a policy question. This is an election year question, isn't it? So let's set Gareth Morgan aside. Let's set what everyone else has done wrong aside. What would you do right in communities like Moerewa?
They used to have a huge freezing works there, but the currency of this country is so inflated that 70% of the red meat grown in Northland comes across the Auckland Harbour Bridge to be killed elsewhere. It's those sorts of economic policies which are being sowed despoliation, sowing so much despoliation in rural New Zealand, in places like Wanganui and elsewhere. And we have for a long time argued for economic policies that would be in the interest of provincial New Zealand, not just the big city corporates, international bankers down in Queen Street, Auckland.
Okay, Gareth Morgan is on the phone.
Just one thing, then. Perhaps you could tell me why he condones 70,000 plus coming to the country now 45% of the workforce of Auckland being immigrants, and telling me where do Maori fit into all that?
Okay, I'm going to ask him.
And he never will be able to.
I'm going to ask him that directly. Gareth Morgan, are you there? Winston Peters, thank you. Gareth Morgan, are you there?
I'll stay there and talk to him as well if you like.
Okay, great. Gareth Morgan, can you answer? Winston Peters, can you... I'm going to get out of the way. Winston Peters, can you ask Gareth Morgan that question directly?
Yeah, Gareth, exactly what is your economic policy to uplift Maori rather than to give them this plethora of treaty promises which no one's been able to deliver and which Rātana Ngāta advised a long time ago against?
Okay, Gareth Morgan. Welcome, Gareth.
Good evening.
So
the flagship policy that we announced a few weeks ago was all about major tax cuts, wasn't it? So, I mean, that's in terms of just pure economic policy, if that's the question. That's a big one.
Well, tax cuts in what way? Let's hear some facts here.
Well, Winston, if you haven't read the policy, I can give you a lecture on it, but it's going to take half an hour.
Well, actually,
okay,
I don't need a sleeping tablet right now. Just tell me the fundamentals of your.
Okay, now hold on a sec. Gareth Morgan, it's your turn to have a shot. And I asked Winston Peters this question. And the issue is not around name calling, although I want to come back and ask you directly why you used the phrase Uncle Tom. But I want to ask you, what is the Opportunities Party going to do if it gets the opportunity to directly address the situation of Māori in New Zealand?
Well, I think the big issue there is the one you alluded to, which was Māori overrepresented in all these very poor economic and social statistics. So there's quite clearly something going on in Māoridom that is very different to what's going on in the rest of society. And, when you talk to Māori about this, when you do the research about this, it's all about that, the last, whatever it is now, 30, 40 years, they've been preoccupied clearly with trying to get some justice in terms of their claims. So, in an unbelievably magnanimous fashion, they have settled for 1.5 to 2 cents in the dollar on that, which is just fantastic of them. Now the issue is, how do we actually honour the treaty going forward? What does the treaty actually mean? And, the interpretation that I'm relying on is the same one that successive governments have, which is basically that it's about two societies who signed a treaty, so two separate societies signed a treaty that said that they would take care of each other, have this duty of care. Now, quite clearly, given that the Māori are so overrepresented in these statistics, that is not happening.
Winston Peters, are you still there? Winston, are you still there?
I am here. Look, can I just say this here?
Well, am I allowed to finish? Or
32 years ago, when I
we're just going to listen to Winston. Because if we're just going to listen to Winston, I'll just,
hold on. Yeah, Gareth, I just want one reply from Winston Peters, then we'll finish on you.
Yeah, look, let me tell you, when I first saw the face of Rogernomics back in '84, I came out and opposed it almost uniquely in the National Party, and I've opposed that neoliberal mantra of rubbish ever since now.
Okay.
What's the treaty you're writing about? It's about equality. And we need economic policies that lift people to equality.
Winston Peters, thank you so much for joining us. Gareth Morgan, I want to say to you that I've spoken to you a lot, and you, contrary to what Winston Peters was suggesting, you've talked about the treaty a great deal. I just wonder how calling Winston Peters and Uncle Tom is in any way constructive, reasonable, decent, consistent with your constant advocacy of better, kinder politics, and whether actually it was attention-seeking as you are being accused of.
Well, I mean, it's very similar to what I did with cats, isn't it, really?
No, it's not. No, come on. It's not.
Am I allowed to answer the question here?
Yeah, but let's try and be reasonable with our answer. There is no comparison with cats.
If you can give me space, I'll answer the question.
Okay.
Right. The whole cat thing, if you recall, the first headline was Cats to Go. And that's why that particular campaign took off, because it grabbed the attention and made people think about the issue. Now, with this particular issue, which is that Winston is actually incredibly anti-treaty, and as Don Brash said, he's the only man, the only politician who supports the Hobson Pledge, and that's why, they get on so well, these two. It's the same thing. I was not talking to Winston, actually. I was talking to the gathered Māori there and saying, why do you tolerate this man who quite clearly, and here's the evidence, and I've got more coming, has a string of
Okay.
Initiatives. Can I finish, John? Only take half a sentence.
Okay, go.
You don't have to be that patient. Has a string of initiatives that are very anti you getting your fair share from the treaty in terms of your rights. Thanks.
Okay. All of that is as it may be, but I just, that Uncle Tom was incendiary, inflammatory and outrageous. And aren't you meant to be the guy who's better than that? I mean, aren't you meant to be ushering in a new era of something constructive?
Well, I can really talk in a passive, namby-pamby fashion, if you like, John, but it won't get the attention in the debate that we're getting now, and it's very important.
I know that's sad, isn't it? And that's a reflection on the media, and I feel embarrassed that actually you have to say Uncle Tom to get an interview on Checkpoint, and we all, and physician, heal thyself. I'm absolutely aware of that. But are you going to be the boy who has to stand in the corner saying poo bum fart in order to get some coverage?
All I've done is raise an issue. We seem to be discussing it, which is blimmin' fantastic, isn't it? Because, Maori need their rights.
Okay. 30 seconds. What is the most important thing that can be done to achieve the kind of equality you believe in?
Well, the main thing is devolution, rangatiratanga, which is deliver the services to Maori, health, education and social security in an empathetic fashion so that it actually does the job, as opposed to in a Europeanised, one-size-fits-all fashion, so it doesn't do the job. That is why Maori are so overrepresented in those statistics. And we are obligated to do that under the treaty.
Gareth Morgan, Opportunities Party leader, thank you so much for joining us. Winston Peters on before that. We'd love your feedback. We'll bring it to you tomorrow night. Thank you for the feedback on the business case that the Canterbury DHB are having to mount to get funding for mental health care in the city. Most of you, in fact all of you who have contacted us are saying, what? That's the end of a Checkpoint tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. One of the 2 Pike River survivors says he's prepared to re-enter the mine where 29 men died in 2010. 3 real estate companies will no longer sponsor a Northland rodeo following allegations that animals were mistreated. Political leaders exchanged insults at Rātana Pa today. New Zealand faces a new era in trade after President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the Prime Minister says the government has struck the right balance in lifting the adult minimum wage to $15.75 an hour from April. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Donald's glove.